listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Hello and welcome along to a brand new Straight to Video podcast with me, your host, Rob Lane, and I hope you're all doing okay. First up, I want to thank you all for making January 2021 the most successful month for this podcast, with the most downloads and streams we've had since we started. Yeah, there were some really popular chats over the past few weeks which helped hit this, but all the episodes have been receiving regular listens, so that's super encouraging, so thank you all. Please make sure you're following us or subscribed on whatever podcast platform you listen on so you don't miss a single episode, and keep letting your friends know about the conversations I'm having and all the cool people you're hearing about. On today's show, I chat to Lex H Jones, who is a Sheffield-based author who has just released his brand new book, Whistling Past the Graveyard, which is a cool compilation of ghostly horror-filled tales, and even someone as lazy as me when it comes to reading checked this bad boy out and enjoyed it. I had a blast checking in with Lex, as we've been online buddies for a few years now, bumped into each other briefly at horror conventions and regularly share photos of cool retro toys online, but it was great to get him actually on the podcast to chat about his work, and it's cool to see him continually gaining more and more success. Our talk bounces all over the place, from discussing Lex's new book, which you can pick up on Amazon, along with his children's book, The Old One and the Sea, which is beautifully illustrated by our mutual friend Liam Pays Hill. We also chat about some of our favourite horror anthology movies and some of our favourite toys of the past. Exactly what I want to talk about here on the Straight to Video podcast. And we also debate the 1987 Masters of the Universe movie, making this probably the most important podcast episode I've done so far. So, sit back and enjoy my Straight to Video talk with Lex H Jones. So your new book, Whistling Past the Graveyard, it's a collection of, are you going to describe them as short horror stories? Is horror the right term?
The term ghost story seems to get thrown around a lot, but then you buy a book that's called Ghost Stories and half of the stories in it aren't ghosts. It kind of encompasses everything that fits in that sort of medium. So yeah, that ghost stories, horror stories, yeah.
It's got a wonderful introduction which tells us a little about how you got into writing and your love of, I say not horror in the gore or violent sense, but more in the eerie ghost sense. And in that introduction, you throw it right back to when you were around 5 or 6 years old and your granddad would tell you stories. I don't want to give too much away because people want to read the introduction, but it says that was after he learned of you liking all things ghostly and macabre. So what was it prior to that kind of intrigued you?
It's just one of those things where, as long as I can remember, I've always liked classic horror stuff, you know, like castles and graveyards and foggy woodlands and swamps and all that kind of thing. Any cartoon or anything that featured that stuff, like the Ghostbusters cartoon or like Scooby-Doo, or there was that little Dracula cartoon in the 80s, and anything like that, that was always like my baseline of stuff. You know, like as a kid, you come and go with your interests, like this year you're into Power Rangers, and then the next year it's Transformers, and then the year after. But you always have that one thing that you're always interested in, no matter what. Well, for me, it was always monsters and ghosts.
What about films? Was there any kind of first film that really scared you or just intrigued you?
I was kind of allowed to watch films that had kind of passed into being quite retro. So, you know, like your black and white horror films and that kind of thing. Because you tend to find that over time, don't you? Stuff that's considered extreme or scary when it first comes out. 20 years later, you let your kids watch it, you know? But I had that friend as a kid who's like a couple of years older than you and has parents who don't really give as much of a crap as they should about what he's doing. So I ended up watching a lot of horror films through him, probably younger than I should have done.
How old was you?
Oh, I must have been about 7 or 8. And I remember watching like Friday the 13th and Fright Night and the first Alien film. Yeah, that kind of era. One of the Friday the 13th, but I can't remember which one. Just that kind of thing. And it was because his parents didn't really care what he was watching. So I'd end up, know, watching them at his house.
Did he used to rent them, or did he just have like dodgy copies of them?
I seem to remember that they didn't come in proper boxes, because I always remember video box artwork as a kid, and I never remember seeing any for those films. So I think it must have been sort of taped off of someone else's legitimate copy.
And this is all in Sheffield, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you always lived there?
I have, yeah. I live about 15 minutes from where I grew up, actually. It's not Sheffield in the city. I live just on the edge of the Peak District in the countryside. So, like, you come out my house, turn left, and there's moors.
There you go. That's a good setting for you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
So did you always, when you was watching these films through your mate, at what point did you start heading to the video shop? Did you always gravitate towards the horror section when renting movies, or was you pretty much up for anything around that time?
I did, but I was never allowed to kind of rent them because, I mean, it's easy to forget this now. Well, people might not even realise depending on their age, but like most horror films were aged 18 then, and you don't really get 18 ratings on things now, do you? It's not something you see.
It is surprising every time you click on Netflix and it says rated 15 and it's like, dang.
Yeah. So I always remember, you know, you always see particular video covers in there. I always remember seeing the Terminator film, which I did eventually watch because my dad bought the video. You know, the classic black cover where he's got the sunglasses on and the red eye. And then I remember seeing the Predator quite a lot. I remember watching that with my granddad, actually. I watched it for the first time with him. And those, I don't know if they were serious horror films or not, but I always remember seeing the boxes for those house films where there was like a severed hand on the front, you know? I remember seeing them all the time.
Did you ever track them down and watch them eventually?
I haven't, actually, no. It just came up in conversation the other day about horror films you'd never actually got around to watching, and I mentioned that one. But no, are they worth watching? Are they any good?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, the cover to the first one is friggin' iconic with that hand. And that kind of terrified me when I saw the poster, but then when I saw the film, it's very comedy horror.
Is it?
Yes.
Right, okay, so it is.
And the second one is even more. The second one doesn't hardly feels like a horror film, more of like a fantasy kind of film. And then the third one, House 3, apparently that was never meant to be a house movie.
Oh, so they kind of slapped the label on it.
Exactly, just to get more people. But they're all decent. First one's definitely the standout one. I've not seen it for years, though.
I'll see if it's on any streaming service or anything. I'll see if I can track it down, yeah.
That is weird that that's the one that you remember seeing, though. That's crazy.
It's just that box art. I mean, you're saying it's iconic. It must be something that a lot of people remember, but I always remember that.
That even had a cinema release as well, that film did.
Did it really? That's unusual for something like that.
Where was your local video shop?
It was called Ritz.
Yeah, I remember Ritz, yeah. Yellow and red.
That's it. Classic 80s logo with the sort of slanted writing. And yeah. Eventually they got taken over by Blockbuster, which I think a lot of UK chains did, but it used to be Ritz, and I remember going in there.
Those places were pretty strict about ages as well. It wasn't like the mum and dad place where you could find somewhere where they'd even loan you a porno every now and again. That wasn't happening at Ritz.
No, because they had like proper memberships, and yeah, they were really strict. But I remember we used to get the Labyrinth film out a lot. That was one we used to watch. And I remember watching, I think the first time I saw the Star Wars films were from there as well. I think the first time we got them. Although I do remember them being on at Christmas one year, the original Star Wars films. I think there was a Christmas when I was like 4 or 5. But yeah, Labyrinth was a repeat rental.
Everything else was out on loan, all the new releases.
Yeah. Go back to that. Old favourite, yeah.
Any other films which perhaps people might not know? Because I always have these conversations where, especially like you say, when you just remember these films which are like ingrained in your mind that, oh, everyone must know about that film. Like we always go to stuff like Monster Squad and things like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I just figured it was one of the biggest films in the world, but it turns out it's not.
Yeah, of course, yeah. No, there was one. It was an animated one. I don't think many people have heard of it. It's kind of very clearly kind of in the wake of Star Wars. You know, because it has this guy who's got a laser sword.
It's not something like Star Chaser, The Legend of Orin or something like that.
Yes.
But I remember it was like slapped between all the trailers for all like the big budget films, which is really weird.
The bad guy was a very sort of Darth Vader looking. He had the long black cloak and yeah. But I just remember liking it as a kid. I've never seen it since.
I'm going to have to check that out and confirm the title. I'm sure it's something like that. What about the cinema?
We didn't have a local one, but we had an Odeon in Sheffield City Centre. Because this was kind of before they were like big multiplex cinemas, you know, there'd be like one film showing and you'd see that. And I remember the very first film I remember seeing there was the DuckTales movie. I remember seeing that. And then the next thing was the Muppets Christmas Carol as well, which is classic. I remember seeing Hook there as well. And my dad used to work in London a lot, so he wasn't always there. But I do remember when I was a little bit older and me, my dad and my granddad would go to the cinema together quite a lot. And I remember doing that.
Oh, man. Very cool.
Yeah. 3 generations of
That's
it.
the important stuff. So with the new book, Whistling Past the Graveyard, this a series of short stories, how do you go about compiling a book like that? Is it something you sit down to write several stories, or is it like a collection of ideas that have been bouncing around for some time and it's like finally time to condense them all into one?
It's a bit of a mix of both, really, because like before this book, I had already got quite a large number of short stories published in other books with other people. My proudest one is that I'm in one with Clive Barker, which is pretty cool. When I decided to do my own collection, I didn't want to just reuse stories I'd done before, so I picked a couple out that I thought were particularly strong, and then I wanted to write new ones, so I kind of just started making notes about any, where you get those like half-formed ideas that you haven't quite thought about. So I started making notes for them, and then I wanted to do a bit of variety as well. I didn't want to have like 5 werewolf stories or 5 vampire stories or whatever. So I just kind of tried to get like a spread, and also not too many, because I think you don't want to overface people with like 50 stories in a book.
When you sent me the book originally, I said, I'm not much of a reader, so I don't think I'll get a chance to check out, but checked out the Lodge one. Friggin' great, man.
Thank you.
These are kind of like the bite-sized stories I like.
Yeah. Same here, actually. I struggle with a full-length horror novel because I think for horror particularly, I think most premises, they're not strong enough for a full book. They could do with being like a 30-page story. I mean, people always say that about Stephen King books. Like, that were great, but it could have been vastly shorter than that. I kind of feel the same about anything I write as well. I don't want people reading it and thinking, he stretched this out a bit,
Yeah, no, there's just the right amount of like character building and description and stuff like that, and then it was like jumping onto the juicy stuff, which was good. Like you're saying, like Stephen King, even Stephen King's short stories, they've been made into feature-length films because they're so friggin' long.
Yeah, they have, yeah.
With the stuff in kind of like your book, it gives you that nice, I'm going to say creep show, even though that has got some Stephen King stuff in it as well, but it's got that cool kind of creep show vibe. Do you have any particular horror anthology films which you're a fan of?
I do, but it's funny because I was thinking about this and I can remember segments from loads of them, but I couldn't necessarily tell you which film they were from, So, like you said, creep show there, I think it's one of them. I really like the one where those people are stuck on that raft in the middle of a lake.
Yes, Creepshow 2.
Is that in Creepshow? Right.
That is a great one, man.
Yeah, it's just, you never even find out what it is. There's just some sort of oily creature thing that lives in the water, and if you go near it, you die. And they're just stuck on this raft, and it's just such a sort of paranoid, everyone turning on each other sort of thing. And it's one of them where you think about, imagine being in that situation. What would you actually do? And that's a good one. And then I like the Trick or Treat film. The whole film of that is really good, because all the anthology pieces in that sort of tie together.
Very cleverly as well.
Yes, yeah, they do. There was another one with the character Art the Clown. Are you familiar with him? He's like a mime.
Yes, yeah.
He's kind of like a horror character in his own right now, but the first film he was in was an anthology thing.
Was it something like Tales of Halloween or something? It was like...
Yeah, just some generic...
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some obvious title like that. And he was kind of the linking thread in all those movies, and I remember them being quite good. But there is one segment of a much older horror anthology, which I couldn't tell you for the life of me what it is. It feels like something you'd read in like an old Crypt Keeper comic, but it's not Creepshow because it's older than that. This couple go to this house, like a haunted house, inverted commas, for their anniversary or something. And she's telling the husband all about the murders that happened at this house. And the guy who did it used to use these big shears or something, like hedge clippers. And what's actually happening is that the house is full of their kind of friends who are all basically going to wind him up by pretending the house is haunted. So they're going to be closing doors and doing various things. And it kind of getting him increasingly stressed out and panicky, culminating with his wife dressing up as the ghost with the head shears, coming at him, and he kills her.
Spoiler, guys. Spoiler.
And then and then everyone kind of steps out the cupboard, and it's like, oh shit.
Oh shit, I don't know that one.
But I just really vividly remember that segment, because it's one of them where you think that would absolutely happen. If you just push this to kind of a prank like that too far, and he's got a gun on him or something, you could so easily imagine that happening. But it's some obscure like 70s one, which they did a lot of at the time. I don't know if they were cheaper, but they seem to be a lot of that kind of, 3 short stories rather than one full-length horror.
You ever seen the really old film Ghost Story, as you're into ghost stuff? But it's like got some really iconic actors, like people like Fred Astaire or Douglas Fairbanks.
Oh, hang on. That sounds familiar now you've said that.
Like telling each other ghost stories. Finally got a copy of it on video, which I need to watch and see if it's as good as I remember.
Yeah, it's always risky with anything like that, isn't it? When you've seen it years ago and then you think, oh, I'm going to watch this and just see whether or not it holds holds up or not.
Definitely. Who were the authors who you kind of began to gravitate to when you were younger and kind of starting out?
I've always kind of liked really old school stuff in terms of writing. So like I've always really liked Dickens, and my favourite ghost story author is M.R. James, who writes a lot of like classic British ghost stories. He's always been one of my favourites. Many of the ghost stories that my granddad used to tell me were his, in fact, that he'd kind of reframed to be suitable for children. One of which I've got a tattoo of, because it was kind of, I always wanted something to do with my granddad as a tattoo. So I got a tattoo of something from one of the stories. And yeah, he was an author I used to read a lot of. But I also really sort of gravitated towards Roald Dahl, because you don't really realise it as a kid, but when you look back now, there's a lot of dark elements in Roald Dahl stories compared to, like, you think of your classic kids authors like your Enid Blyton and whatnot, and it's all airy-fairy and perfectly innocent and all that. But then you read Roald Dahl stuff and there's some messed up stuff in some of that. And he has actually done adult ghost stories as well, which I've got a collection of. And you can see when you read those that, he likes writing macabre stuff, and he kind of just slips a little bit into the kids' stories where he can, you know?
Well, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is odd.
It is, yeah.
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
it's an odd one, that, yeah.
Have you ever been like introduced to, say, an author from watching a movie adaptation and thought, I really like this, I'm going to go back and read the novel?
The most obvious example I can remember is with The Crow, because I really like the film The Crow, and I'd heard it was a graphic novel, so I read that, but I don't actually think the graphic novel's as good as the film. Usually goes the other way for me. I've usually read the book first and then I go and see the film.
That's usually the old kind of, you should read the book.
Yeah, but I often find that it isn't. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but like with some things, like I really love the Lord of the Rings films. I think they're fantastic. When I tried to read the book, the first book, and it's too much. Sometimes if you get a good director, what a film adaptation does is it kind of strips out all the faff, all the like unnecessary bump, you know. You don't need this poem, you don't need this 15-page song that one of the hobbits sings. You don't, you know, you can just get to the core of what this is meant to be about whilst keeping the heart of it and not losing what makes it a great story. And I think the Lord of the Rings adaptations are great for that. So I think if you've watched the films, I think it's then, as the first thing, I think it is difficult to then go back and read the book, because now you're adding in all the bump, you know? Yeah,
I mean, and a book's good to create it in your head, and once you've seen the film, I guess you've got it all kind of laid out for you.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
I did go back and read The Body by Stephen King, though, which was the film Stand By Me, which is one of my all-time favourite films. And I did go back and read the book, and I loved it. I thought the book did like add some different kind of emotions on top of it. That's the only one I've kind of really dived back in. Do you have like a favourite book to movie adaptation? Or would it be The Crow, because they improved on the graphic novel?
I think The Crow improves on it because it adds a lot of stuff that you can't do in the graphic novel, like the music.
Yes, yeah. That soundtrack was huge.
Not just the songs, but like the ambient music and the little segues between one scene or another and all that is just perfectly captures it. And you can't really do that in a graphic novel, so it doesn't really work. But I think a really good adaptation of something is often something that, like I said, cuts away the unnecessary stuff. So like I think a really good example of that in the last 10 years or so is the Watchmen film. I actually think that's, again, it improves on the ending of the book. It's a graphic novel, but it reads like a novel because it's not a continuous comic book series like Superman or Batman or something. It's a one and done thing, you know. It starts and ends with that book, so it reads more like an actual novel. But yeah, I think that was a really good adaptation because it kind of tweaked what wouldn't work and improved on it. And I think the best adaptations to me always do that. You can improve on the work of the book if you want to keep it faithful. You don't have to do like a word for word adaptation of it, you know.
Was writing something you enjoyed at school or excelled at, or something you found you had a knack with later on?
Used to do quite a lot of creative writing at school. It was something that we seemed to focus on quite heavily, and I do remember teachers telling me that I was good at it, which is kind of the only thing I ever remember being told that I was good at, really. I never struggled at school. I was fine at everything, you know. You know, you can do everything well enough that you don't really get noticed either way.
You just quietly ticked along.
Exactly. Yeah, you just you get enough that you're doing all right in your tests, and you don't have to ask stupid questions, but at the same time you're not like acing everything and that kind of thing. But with writing, it was the first thing where anybody had said to me, you're really good at this. In fact, I remember he was a supply teacher, and he gave us a writing exercise where we had to read this children's book that was for younger children than us. I think we were like 8 or 9 at the time, and this was aimed at like toddlers. And then we had to write a story set within the framework of these books that we'd read. And it was kind of a writing exercise to teach you about writing for other people. So instead of just write words on a page, it's getting you to think about who are you writing these for, and what sort of language you're going to use, and what sort of subject matter you're going to do. And I remember writing these stories. And I remember him, when he was marking them, I remember him saying to me, you should genuinely consider carrying on doing this as you get older. And that was the first time anyone had ever said that. And I didn't think anything of that, because you don't at that age. But then as I got older, I've always enjoyed writing just for the sake of it. It never occurred to me to send it anywhere and try and make any money off it, but I'd always enjoyed it was just something I'd do for fun, just writing a story. Or
that comment perhaps stuck with you more than you actually realised, because you can remember it now.
I think it did, yeah.
Kind of set a seed.
Yeah, I think it was always in there. And I think if people ever asked me, has anyone ever told you could write, I always went back to him. But it's not as if I constantly had that in my head as the driving motivation to do it. It was just swirling around in there somewhere.
Did you enjoy school? Did you find yourself in any kind of particular clique?
I think I did up till high school, because that was when things became kind of cliquey. Like you're one of these types or you're one of them types. And I never really fit in with any of that. I mean, I've always struggled with a lot of normal social interaction stuff. Something I discovered last year about myself through counselling is that I'm actually on the autistic spectrum, which is something I never knew, and I discovered last year. And I've kind of accepted that about myself, and it's explained a lot of things that, where you look back and you think, why can't I do this? Why does everyone else seem capable to do this thing and I can't, but it explains a lot of those things, which is quite nice. But I've often struggled to, when things become really complicated and nuanced like they are in high school, where there's all this invisible bullshit that you're expected to do to fit in, I can't do that. I often feel like I'm an alien observing other people. So I watch them, and he does this, and then he says this, and then he laughs at that joke and he does that. I would just kind of try and copy what other people were doing, but I'm missing half of the steps, because it's kind of those things that without knowing, and I can't do any of that. But I remember the biggest trend at school that I just never understood and still don't was Tamagotchis, because I do not see the point in that. What is it? It's just this little thing that beeps at you and you periodically have to press a button to feed it. I'd got a Nintendo at home. Why do I want one of these things? Pogs as well. That were another thing that was ridiculous. And trying to explain that to someone now, it's like these little cardboard discs that used to stick in a pile, and then you'd throw a bigger disc at them and knock them. Oh, yeah. People at my school weren't really into things like franchises. It was more like who's wearing these branded clothing.
Oh, that's a constant, mate. That's a constant over generations, that is.
It's a shame, because I was much more into stuff like, music and films and that kind of stuff, and people weren't really bothered about that. But when I got to college, that changed.
You're a big music fan, though, as well, aren't you? Does that kind of run alongside passions for writing, or is it a nice, steady accompaniment?
No, it does actually run alongside it, because I tend to, when I'm about to write something new, I tend to put a soundtrack together of things that will get me in the right mindset to write that kind of tone. I'm not going to be listening to like industrial death metal when I'm about to write my children's book. I need to get in the right mindset for it. So yeah, music often complements what I'm doing.
You mentioned the children's book then, and you spoke about your granddad telling you stories about when you were growing up, but you've also wrote and published your own book for younger readers, The Old One and the Sea. Can you tell us a bit about what inspired that?
It was one of those where someone said to me, because it's to do with H.P. Lovecraft and his monsters, and it's like a children's reimagination of that story. And I was just talking with a friend about whether or not you could feasibly do a children's version of those stories, but not in like a silly, cutesy sort of way, but as a legitimate story with real heart to it, real characters, real emotion. And it was just started as like a hypothetical, jokey sort of conversation that you have in a bar. But then the more I thought about it, the more we spoke about it, the more I thought I could do something with this. I have actually having ideas coming out that could work. And it just kind of sprang from that, really. And then I spoke to our mutual friend Liam, and he wanted to do the artwork for it, which he did. So it became like a collaborative effort. And that was just great, because I look at that cover and everyone always compliments how beautiful that cover is. And, I'm mates with the guy who did it, which is really nice.
So what was the whole kind of construction of that, with like the source material and putting it all together? Was it quite an undertaking?
Yeah, because I wanted to keep it on kind of like following the same lines as the original story that it's based on, which is the story called The Call of Cthulhu, but adapt the events of that to be suitable for children. So there's stuff in it which, if you're like a hardcore fan of that work, you'll recognize it. Like there's characters who are the same, and the name of the boat at one point is the same, and various references to things that I wanted to put in there whilst doing it in a way that was suitable for a much younger audience. So a lot of research went into it, but I love those stories myself anyway, so it wasn't like an effort to read them over and over.
What was the response to it? And did somebody actually pick it up, or did you pitch it to somebody to put it out?
Yeah, I pitched it to a few people. The first person I pitched it to actually wanted it, so I had to withdraw it from a couple of others.
Yeah.
So that worked out quite well. I mean, you're never usually that optimistic, so it's like when you're applying for a job, you rarely just apply for one, do you? You
just throw them all out there, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the one I really wanted to get it with was actually the one who responded to me. So that was...
It's like you pitch at Dragon's Den, you get all 5 of them or 4 of them, however many it is.
Yeah, you think, okay, I don't know what to do now. But I was lucky because the one at my prime choice was the publisher who wanted it. So I think what made it such an appealing thing was the fact that I'd already got all the art done as well. So they didn't then have to go and find an artist and then add another 6 months on while they did the work. And, it was all done, ready. Here's your complete product. You just need to edit it and then it's ready to go.
And what's kind of been the response from people who've actually read it?
It's gone down really well, yeah. I think it's probably been the most popular thing that I've written, to be honest. I've had an awful lot of people contact me and say they've read it to the kids and kind of thing, which I think a lot of people bought it who don't even have kids because they like that mythos and everything, so they want to just read every aspect of it. But yeah, a lot of parents have contacted me and said that they've read it to the kids or the kids have read it themselves, and that's really lovely.
Any plans to do another one or a series?
Yeah, I have spoken to Liam about that because there's at least one more that I want to do, which is based on a different H.P. Lovecraft story, which is At the Mountains of Madness, because I'm going to reframe that as a children's one as well. But I want that consistency with the artwork, so I want Liam to do the artwork for that as well. So it's kind of dependent on when he's free to do that as well as when I can write it. Because I like that thing, like when you look at a Roald Dahl book, they've all got the same artwork.
It's recognisable straight away.
Exactly. And I want that. I want people to see these kids' books. And possibly I'll do a third one as well, toying with the idea of what I could do with that. But I don't want to force it. It's just kind of got to flow quite nicely as a children's story. So, but I'm not thinking about the third one until I've written the second one, really. But it would be quite nice to have a few.
Now, I know you're a bit of a nostalgia fan like myself, and you've been harvesting quite an impressive collection of both old and modern toys, which I'm a little envious of. Did you have a particular favourite toy line when you was a kid?
Yeah, Masters of the Universe.
Yeah? Straight away, boom.
Yeah, no question. Yeah. The villains were just so much more interesting, though, than the good guys. They really were.
That whole range just went insane, though, towards the end.
Yeah, because they were just throwing stuff in which had never been on the cartoon, weren't they?
And what got you into that? Was it the cartoon?
No, we had a second-hand shop near to where I live, and you could just randomly get stuff. And my mum just went in one day for something and just got a few toys while she was in there, and she got me the Skeletor one. And it was the one, I still got it with the battle damage where his chest sort of rotates, and the design of it was just so cool. I mean, it looked like a horror character, which was already something I was into. And then he had this sword, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. So then I found out, I think my mum must have asked somebody some other mum, what it's from, and she found out. So then I just started watching the cartoon. Now, I never liked the cartoon as much as the toy, I must admit, because I always found the cartoon a little bit kind of silly. Like, it always felt a little bit younger than it's meant to be. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was very sort of neutered and harmless, and it never really had any actual suspense to it or threat or jeopardy. But I liked the toys particularly. I was much more into the toys than the cartoon.
Come on, where do you stand on the film? Don't let me down.
I like
yes.
it. Do you know what, though? It's the same argument I give for the Super Mario Brothers film, which I also like.
I've never seen that.
Oh, well, it's mental. But this is the thing. It's just like Masters of the Universe. Without a mega budget like you have now, how could you, in 1989 or whatever it was, bring that to the screen as a credible film?
That never even hit me as a kid. Normally, I don't want to say I was smart or anything like that, but even as a kid, I could normally pick up on certain elements. Oh, that's cheap. That's a cop-out. But with the Master of the Universe film, it never even dawned on me. It almost like made sense. Like, oh yeah, of course they're going to come to Earth. That's the obvious thing.
Yeah, it worked. It just all flowed. And I think it was, when you look at it now, there's some odd decisions in it, but I enjoy it.
Come on, we can have a podcast about the Master Universe film. What are the odd decisions?
Why make up Gwildo when you've got Oko already there?
Okay.
Why make up a bunch of villains when you've already got some?
I just thought there was kind of re-envisionings of them.
They were a bit, but I mean, you could have had Trapjaw. You could have had, Merman.
We kind of did get a Merman, kind of.
Yeah.
They were pretty badass looking.
They did look great. The costumes on them were great. Yeah. They did a really good job with that, because they could have so easily looked like shoddy Power Ranger villains, and they didn't. They all look really good.
Oh my God, exactly.
But I tell you what always irks me on that film is that he only says I have the power once, and he really half-arses it. Come on. You're playing E-Man. This is the bit. This is the thing you've been looking forward to.
Yeah.
You're going to grab that sword, and you're going to
fuck.
scream that at the top of your lungs. And he just really is like, I've got the power. You know, it's like, come on, Dolph, what are you doing? The same thing annoyed me on the most recent Avengers film where Captain America finally says Avengers Assemble and he just kind of mutters it under his breath.
Yeah, it's weird. It's those little things that kind of bug you. It's like, damn it.
But Skeletor's brilliant in that film. Frank Langella as Skeletor.
Oh, God, yeah.
Fantastic.
I loved it. And I think it's like the perfect Saturday afternoon movie.
It is, yeah. It's great. It's got that nostalgic feel, but it's still entertaining without being like, you know, like some things are pure nostalgia in that you're aware that it's crap, but it's nostalgic. But I don't even think it's crap. I actually think it's a good film.
And like you're saying, though, it's like people said it kind of copped out on its budget and brought it to Earth. But it's like, in a way, so much was established with Masters of the Universe. It was so big. So what kind of other option was there to condense it into a 90-minute film?
It'd take too long to explain that world because it's like Middle Earth. You've got the swamps, you've got the rocky bit, you've got the cities, you've got the forest. It wouldn't work. It's far too much to do in one film.
I thought they made the right decision. I thought it was cool. I was in. I still like it.
Yeah, I enjoy it. It's good fun. It's really good fun.
Any toy you wish you'd never got rid of when you're a kid? Was there like that? Everyone seems to have that landmark point when toys get thrown out and mum takes them and gives them away to somebody or sells them.
Yeah, I was quite lucky in that respect because my mum never got rid of the toys, but I sold a load of them when I moved out.
I'm grown up. I'm going to get rid of the toys.
Well, it was more a case of they're going to go from a box in my mum's loft to a box in my loft.
Okay.
So, you know, I didn't really want to bother with the transport of that. But I've ended up rebuying a lot of them in years since. But the one I've not been able to get hold of is Panther. I've got He-Man on Battle Cat and I've got Skeletor still, but I haven't got Panther that he rides on because it had that felt on it.
We like the fuzzy felt kind of feel, yeah.
It used to kind of rub off. So most of the toys you find of it have all rubbed off and of bad quality. The ones that aren't cost more than I'm willing to pay for it.
Okay.
So that's the one that I'm really annoyed with myself for getting rid of.
They look great on a shelf, but as toys, those two were pretty shit.
They didn't move nothing, did they? No. Weren't they from something else, though? They were from another toy line,
Maybe.
weren't they, that they just kind of added in at the last minute, I think.
Possibly. Even as a kid, I was like, this is a bit shit. Nothing
Yeah, they
happens
are.
on it.
Legs don't move.
Look
head
great
don't
on a
move.
shelf.
Yeah, they look great with He-Man sat on it, but they're basically a plastic mould, aren't they? They don't. There's no motion to them at all.
You say like you collect the old stuff. Are you a sucker for new stuff as well?
I've got some horror stuff from newer films. Like they did a toy line last year, which was horror characters done as though they were on the Scooby-Doo cartoon. So you can get like classic horror icons done in the style of Scooby-Doo cartoon. So I got
cool.
the Pennywise one from that, which is really good.
I've not seen them. I've seen the ones, didn't they do like He-Man kind of figures as horror characters?
Yeah.
I saw those.
I've got Jason Voorhees from that. That's really good. He really works because he's got the mask and he's got like a big muscly chest, but half of it's missing and you can see the rib cage under it. And I also like something they've done recently is reissues of classic toys, like the Ghostbusters ones.
I've seen something about that.
Yes, they look exactly the same. The packaging is the same. The accessories, it just looks like they've gone back to the factory and switched the machines back on from 1987, you know, and just turned them out again. But they're great. I really like them.
They know how to tweak all these 30 and 40-year-old dudes.
Yeah. Get the wallet, get the money out.
They'll buy them. They've got the money now. They'll buy the whole set at once.
Yeah, because who else is buying them? Because the kids aren't buying Ghostbusters toys, are they?
Speaking of Ghostbusters, what are your thoughts on the new film when we eventually get to see it?
Well, I think it looks all right.
I think it looks amazing, the trailer.
Yeah, they've kind of leaned quite hard on the Stranger Things popularity, haven't they, with the tone of it? But that's fine. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think leaning away from the old cast and having them in it, but perhaps not as the primary antagonist, is a good idea.
And hopefully not shoehorned in.
Yes. Yeah, I think that worked well with the new Star Wars films as well, like with Force Awakens particularly, because this is something that worries me about the next Indiana Jones film as well. I think if the actor or the actors playing the main characters are considerably older than they were last time, when they turn up in the costume, it kind of looks a bit like a Saturday Night Live sketch.
Well, that did in the last Indiana Jones film. He had
Yes.
some granddad trousers on.
Yeah. You know, I kind of worry that when you see like Aykroyd and Murray and whatnot, and they're all like clearly like knocking 70 now wearing them suits.
I mean, they're old in Ghostbusters.
They weren't exactly young. Yeah. I worry that it's going to look like a bit of a Saturday Night Live reunion sketched thing. And I think leaning too hard on them as the main characters is going to risk that. Whereas if they're kind of passing the torch like they did in Star Wars, that is a better approach, I think.
Paul Rudd's on board, so
yeah, he's great. You can't go wrong with Paul Rudd. Anything he's in, it's like, yeah, I'm happy with this. That'll be all right.
Nice one, man. Well, congratulations on the new book. Any plans for it coming out? I mean, obviously this year's a weird one.
Yeah, very much.
Do you normally have any kind of plan when you release new books?
Well, I was supposed to be turning up to like a bunch of conventions and doing some signings and stuff like that, none of which is now possible this year. So we're just kind of going to release this as is and do the promotion that we can. But I've got another book out coming out next year, well, the end of this year / possibly beginning of next year, which hopefully I'll be able to do more traditional publishing events for. And if I can kind of take some stock of the previous book as well to those, then I will do, because it's all you can do really at the moment. Even once things start unlocking, it's going to be ages before you can have like a big convention event, isn't it?
Where do you stand on conventions? Do you enjoy them?
I do a bit, but I have problems with anxiety and they can get a bit busy. But ironically, I would do better standing behind a table selling stuff because I've got a job that I can focus on, so I'm standing here, I'm selling, I'm talking to people who talk to me. I'm better with that than just wandering about thinking, okay, what do I do?
Last couple of conventions I've been to, whether they've been because they've been so busy, but I've been like getting in there and I'm like 15 minutes later, it's like, I got to get out. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, which seems so weird when you think now, doesn't it? Being surrounded by that many people. It just seems bizarre to think about, doesn't it?
When did you originally start dipping a toe in the whole convention thing? Have you done them for your books before?
No, I haven't done them behind the table. I had about 3 booked last year where I was going to do it. But yeah, I've only ever been to them kind of like to meet other people. But whilst I've been at them, I have had people come up to me with a copy of my book and ask me to sign it, which is really bizarre, but it's nice. But yeah, it's something that I only like to go really if it's because I'm going to see somebody, if authors who I might kind of know through social contact, but not having met them physically. So, I want to go and meet them and yeah, I'll get something signed by them while I'm there because you might as well. But I'm going because, I've been in a book with you, but I've never physically said
Very cool.
You. So, that kind of thing. And you meet some really nice people through it. But I'm much more about that side of it rather than just going to buy stuff because you can buy it all from bookshops anyway. It's more about the social aspect if I'm doing that.
Well, mate, it's been fab to chat to you and catch up a little bit.
Yeah, and you, thank you.
I'll go and check out those films now. Make sure we were talking about all the right stuff.
Find out the name of the animated one because that's going to bug me.
Thanks to Lex for checking in with us here on the Straight to Video podcast. And if you're a fan of great ghost stories and horror tales, then pick up a copy of Whistling Past the Graveyard on Amazon. I want to shout to all you guys again for your support. I've been reaching out and making connections with some other great podcasts, and over the next few weeks and months, I'll be speaking to a few of them and spreading the word. As we're in kind of a horror and ghost story mood, I want to share with you a trailer for my friend Roxy Drive's podcast, Deadly Debbie's Creepy Files, which I think you'll get a kick out of. Check this out if you like all things horror with a tinge of classic Elvira and Tales from the Crypt.
Well, hello there, little black kitties of the night. Come and join me, your host, Deadly Debbie, as we go through my creepy files and listen to real-life, strange but true stories from people all over the world. Explore the weird and wonderful in my weekly podcast with Deadly Debbie's Creepy Files.
Would love to hear from you guys on any other podcast you think should get some cool exposure, so drop us a line on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram and we can help spread the word. All these people work really hard to put these shows together. I promise you all I've got some really great guests coming up over the next couple of weeks with some cool stories, so can't wait to share all those with you. So until I speak to you all again, take care and catch you real soon.